Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session to resume consideration of the following nomination, which the clerk will report.
Nomination, Department of Labor, Martin Joseph Walsh of Massachusetts to be Secretary.
The Senator from Illinois.
Madam President, thank you. Madam President, the Senate Judiciary Committee has really been in business for a few weeks now, and I think we have begun this session addressing some of the relevant issues that I expected such a committee to address. First, of course, was the appointment of the Attorney General, Merrick Garland. I thank Senator Grassley for his cooperation on a bipartisan basis, bringing that nominee to the floor where he received 70 Senate votes, a bipartisan support for his leadership at the Department of Justice. We continue this week with two more of President Biden's appointments to the Department of Justice, Lisa Monaco and Vanita Gupta. They will be considered by the full Judiciary Committee on Thursday. And we will continue to fill vacancies in the administration as we are sent nominees and have that opportunity. But in addition to that, we have had hearings on several relevant topics and another one starting tomorrow. Christopher Wray, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, was called before the committee for an oversight hearing. It's the first time in more than a calendar year that the head of the FBI was actually brought to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee, the committee that has the traditional oversight responsibility for his agency. His testimony was important and timely. He talked about the Trump-inspired mob that attacked this Capitol and the rise of domestic terrorism in the United States. He identified it as one of the major threats to security in our country, and we are considering legislation to empower him and others in the administration to address this threat. That does not take anything away from our efforts to staunch any inspired international terrorism, but we have learned, unfortunately, that in addition to looking across the ocean to threats of terrorism, in America today we have to look across the street. Unfortunately, there are domestic terrorism groups. We saw them on parade January 6th, and they are still at their work. They must be stopped to make sure that America is safe for everyone. That was an important hearing. We followed it up last week with the first ever Senate hearing on the Equality Act. The Equality Act, which has been enacted by the House of Representatives, has been sent to the Senate for consideration. Senator Merkley of Oregon is the lead sponsor. Simply put, the bill is there to end discrimination against people because of their sexual orientation. I thought it was a very powerful hearing. Most Americans are surprised to learn that though we now recognize marriage by the people of the same gender, that in many states there is no protection against discrimination for those same people. So they could have a marriage in the morning and then be fired from their jobs in the afternoon because of their sexual orientation. It's a gross disparity in justice in this country. And I thought our witnesses brought that point through very clearly. I hope that we can gather bipartisan support for that measure quickly and bring it to the floor. It's long overdue. Tomorrow we're having a hearing which is, unfortunately, very timely. I announced last week that this hearing on common sense steps to reduce gun violence in America would be held this week. On the same day I announced that hearing last week, a gunman murdered 8 people in a string of shootings near Atlanta, Georgia. 1 man, 7 women. 6 of the victims were Asian Americans. He committed these murders with a gun he had bought the same day. That day, children lost their parents, husbands lost their wives, and fear and trauma reverberated across America in the Asian American community. I know that the presiding officer and I have reached out to people in our home state of Illinois to assure them that we are aware of this and going to do everything we can to stop this type of discrimination and this terrible violence that followed. According to the Gun Violence Archive, there have been 27 mass shootings in America this month. 27 mass shootings this month, with a mass shooting defined as an incident where at least 4 victims were shot. Mass shootings, of course, make the biggest headlines, but day after day, week after week, the deadly toll of gun violence grows. Last weekend, 20 people were shot in our city of Chicago, 4 of them fatally. And across the nation, every day, we lose on average 109 American lives to gunfire, suicide, domestic violence shooting, accidental shooting, and homicides. And another 200 Americans are injured by guns each day. The numbers are sobering, and that is why tomorrow the Senate Judiciary Committee is going to address this issue. The subcommittee chairman, Dick Blumenthal of Connecticut, will take over the full committee hearing after I make some opening remarks. I know that he has a special feeling for this issue because of the tragedy in Newtown, Connecticut, just a few years ago, when a gunman went in and killed so many innocent children and their teachers at a grade school. It was one horrible event. It was an event that was so horrible that many of us said that can make the difference. Politically, that's going to change America. It's going to result in things happening finally. It's common sense, constitutional gun safety measures that will keep guns out of the hands of people who would misuse them. Well, I would have lost that bet. Many others would have too, because we failed to respond in a timely fashion. What stopped us from passing a bill in the United States Senate for background checks to make sure that convicted felons did not purchase guns legally in America and would be stopped because of roadblocks we put in their paths? People who were mentally unstable would not have access to guns, which they could use to hurt innocent people, as we've seen over and over again. What stopped that from happening? A rule in the United States Senate. It's called the filibuster. And what it says is it takes more than a majority for the overwhelming majority of the American people to see gun safety in America. It takes 60 votes in a Senate evenly divided 50-50. Well, we're just hoping that maybe there is a sentiment, a bipartisan sentiment that can reach 60 votes on thoughtful, common sense gun control that will really say to people, yes, you have your Second Amendment right to own a gun legally, responsibly, and to store it safely. You can use it for sporting and target practice and self-defense if you wish. But we want to make certain that we eliminate as much as possible those who would misuse those firearms. It's interesting. The overwhelming majority of firearm owners across the nation believe that same thing. They don't argue with the premise that they want guns to be in the hands of people who will use them responsibly. And yet, despite this overwhelming majority sentiment, we can't get the bill through the United States Senate for the very reason I mentioned, the filibuster. So when Senator McConnell comes to the floor each day to defend the filibuster, the basic question you have to ask him is, if the Senate can work with the filibuster, show us. Show us. Show us that if we bring 45 or 50 votes to the floor, there are 10 Republicans who will join us and work with us to pass important legislation. That wouldn't be the only thing. There'll be many other things. I've heard speeches on the floor by so many Republicans about the situation on our southern border with immigration, and it truly is a challenge. I work on it because it's the matter that I've paid a lot of attention to in my career, but also because it's subject matter in the Senate Judiciary Committee. Why is it that we have not addressed immigration reform in the United States? The filibuster. That's the reason. The filibuster has stopped us from passing measures like the DREAM Act. I introduced the DREAM Act 20 years ago to say if you're brought here to the United States as a child, raised in this country, you ought to have a path to legalization and citizenship so you can stay in the country you call home. Simple premise, overwhelmingly supported by the American people. 5 times I brought the DREAM Act to the floor of the Senate for passage. Let's make this a law. 5 times it failed. Why? The filibuster rule. Each time I had a majority, but not the necessary 60 votes. That's another example of where the filibuster has stepped in and stopped a majority of the Senate from passing a measure which was timely, I believe thoughtful, and which the American people overwhelmingly supported. So I would say to the defenders of the filibuster, show us it can work. We have had so little legislative activity that was subject to this filibuster rule over the last several years. And obviously some senators are very content with that. I'm not. There's work to be done, not just in the areas I mentioned, but in so many others. Infrastructure program for America is a good example too. Let's get to work in the Senate and do what we were elected to do, to deliberate, to legislate, to amend, to express different points of view, but ultimately to enact laws that will make this a better nation. Madam President, I'd ask consent that the next statement I make be placed in a separate part of the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I want to salute a member of my staff before I make this statement. His name is Chris Holman. He's been with me a number of years. He has a special passion for people who are languishing in prisons around the world for so-called political crimes. And he has convinced me to make this my cause as well. And time after time, we have been successful in seeing the release of these political prisoners simply by speaking on the floor and addressing the embassies of the countries where they're in prison and trying to put some political pressure on the leaders of those countries to release those prisoners. You wouldn't believe that would work, would you, in an authoritarian regime? But it turns out it does. And over the years, we have been successful in helping many political prisoners be released. Today, I'd like to address that topic again. There are political prisoners languishing in jails around the world for nothing more than advocating for human rights and political freedom. These brave souls, often journalists, activists, opposition leaders, are often led to believe they or their efforts to push for freedoms are forgotten. I come to the floor today to tell them that is not the case. Let me start with a particularly cruel and troubling set of cases. Saudi writer Raif Badawi and his lawyer, Walid Abu al-Khair. Badawi was arrested in 2012 for his peaceful writings, charged with apostasy, sentenced to 10 years in prison in 2012 and 1,000 lashes, at least 50 of which were carried out despite international uproar. Badawi suffers poor health, hypertension. His condition has worsened during 10 years in prison. I had the honor of meeting his wife, Insaf Haider, here in Washington, D.C. some years ago. She is living in exile in Canada with their young children after facing threats to her life in Saudi Arabia. Badawi's lawyer, Walid Abu al-Khair, a leading human rights activist, also was arrested in 2014 and sentenced to 10 years in prison and a 15-year travel ban. As these two men near the latter years of their sentences, I once again appeal to the government of the Saudis to free them. They have suffered enough. I also call for the release of Filipino Senator Leila de Lima, who just passed her 4th year languishing in jail in the Philippines. Here's her photo in her cell where she sends out letters, which I received recently. As a leading human rights advocate, she has criticized the repressive actions of President Rodrigo Duterte. From time to time, Senator de Lima writes me from that cell. Let me share a short excerpt from this brave woman who incredibly, after 4 years in confinement, still maintains her sense of humor. She wrote, "Warm greetings from my detention quarters at the Philippine National Police Custodial Center, Camp Crame. I do not know how long I'll remain behind bars, but there's one thing that I'm sure, my will to fight for what is right continues to be undeterred." She's not alone in being targeted by Duterte. Many of us have spoken about his political harassment of Filipino journalist Maria Ressa, who received her 9th arrest warrant in November and 10th in January. I've met with many in the Filipino-American community in Illinois. We have a great, great community of Filipinos in the Chicagoland area and across the state. I know that they and colleagues here, like Senators Markey and Leahy, will continue to support efforts to see a more accountable and democratic Philippines. Lastly, let me turn to the United Arab Emirates, where one of that nation's top human rights defenders, Ahmed Mansour, also just passed his 4th year in jail. You see, Mansour was arrested under the guise that his social media post advocating for human rights threatened the social harmony of the UAE. He's considered to be one of the last human rights defenders in the Emirates, as peacefully advocates for freedom of expression, fair trials, and the humane treatment of prisoners. Since his troubling sentencing in 2017, he has endured solitary confinement and cruelly been deprived of visits with his family. Despite the dismal conditions of his incarceration, he remains steadfast in his commitment to human rights, even conducting multiple hunger strikes in protest of jail conditions, the same conditions he spoke out against before his detention. It is long overdue that Emiratis let this man go. America's strength around the world comes not only from its military and its economy, but also from the power of its ideals. I can tell you from the many former prisoners who have come to visit me over the years that the support of this body and this Congress and the American people that we may just take for granted as another speech on the floor of the Senate can make a difference. They come to learn that someone actually mentioned their name on the floor of the United States Senate in Washington, D.C. It sustains them, it encourages them, it gives them hope, and it puts pressure on the governments that jail them to justify and rationalize the cruel treatment that they're responsible for. So let me remind Raif Badawi, Walid Abukir, Senator Leila de Lima, Maria Ressa, and Ahmed Mansour, you are not forgotten. We will continue to advocate for your freedom, and we hope that it comes someday soon. Madam President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.